Hello, I'm Oprah Winfrey. Some investors have been making some pretty serious accusations about the behavior of some neighborhoods, particularly in the city of Seattle. So today, I'm going to interview representatives from two of these neighborhoods. First, on the couch, I'd like you to welcome Victoria from the downtown neighborhood and Pillar from Ballard. We're glad you're here. And first question is, these are truly shocking accusations that are being made. Are they true? Are you both on steroids? The evidence is this. In the Belltown, downtown, South Lake Union market, developers are planning to open 5,600 units in the next 3 years. That's an increase in the apartment stock of about 70%. It's a pretty shocking number just looking at it by itself. Then, if you look at the Ballard market, developers are planning to double the number of apartment units in the next 3 years. Now that's going to add 2,000 units. That's not as many units as we'll see added in the Belltown, downtown, South Lake Union market, but it's a very significant increase, especially when you consider that in the last 16 years combined, developers opened fewer than 600 units in that market area. Now, one of the reasons that we're seeing this dramatic level of production in these Seattle neighborhoods that we've never seen before is there's been a shift in development from the suburban market in the last major building boom that we had in the late 1980s to the urban market. Back in the late 1980s, about 90% of all the apartment units that opened up were in the suburban market. In the next few years, that number is going to be closer to 40 or 45%. So there's been a major shift from suburban to urban living. So when you look at these trends, you have to take that into account. And the other thing to do is to say, well, has this ever happened before, this level of development activity that we're seeing? Well, clearly not in those two neighborhoods that we just talked about, but it has happened elsewhere around the region. So if we go back to that boom period in the late 1980s and look at some neighborhoods, we might get a sense of what we can expect in the next few years in some of these in-city urban neighborhoods. So first, let's look at Juanita. If you look at apartment development activity in Juanita, you could see that there was a very significant increase in the housing stock between 1985 and 1987. In fact, it increased by about 160%. That's dramatic, and that should have had an impact on vacancies. And it did. As developers opened more units, the vacancy rate shot up. But ultimately, the vacancy rate came down and came down pretty quickly and adjusted again. This sort of underscores a concept that we've commented on a lot in the past. A lot of investors would like to think that the apartment market sort of operates in equilibrium most of the time, where supply and demand are nicely balanced. But our contention is that the market is never actually in equilibrium. It simply passes through it, from a period of being undersupplied, like Juanita was in the early 1980s with a very low vacancy rate, to oversupplied, like it was for a little while in 86 and 87, and then back to undersupplied again, and then oversupplied, undersupplied, and so on. And so another neighborhood we could look at back in the 80s was the Redmond market. In that market, developers almost doubled the amount of apartment units in just 3 years, between 86 and 88. If you go out another few years to 1991, the housing stock or apartment stock almost tripled. A very dramatic level of development activity there. And likewise, we saw vacancies climb, but again, for a pretty short period of time. So dramatic increases in supply alone doesn't tell you what's going to happen to vacancies except in the very near term. There's something else that you really need to look at. One of the things that we just did talk about was the shift from suburban to urban development. So that's just creating more activity in areas where we haven't seen it as much and less activity in areas where we used to see more. Also, in last week's video, we talked about a number of other trends that have a major impact on the market. The whole demand side. The whole demand side, you've got to look at employment, what's happening to job growth in our region. the impact of Gen Y households, which are predominantly renters rather than homeowners, the geyser effect that's going to have a huge impact. Go back and take a look at that video for more comments on that. In that video, we also talked about how in the next few years at least, it looks like apartment development is really going to be the lion's share of all housing development, which is different than it used to be. If you go back to the 1980s, single-family development was very significant. In the 1990s and in the early 2000s, condominium development was very significant. Neither of those are really pulling their weight right now. It's all falling on the apartment market. Then you can go back to earlier articles that we've written where we talked about the shift in what product the consumer wants. We've sort of gone from the McMansions of the 1990s to the iHome of today and tomorrow. Another thing is, what are consumers' goals today? And we had a tongue-in-cheek discussion about how television has shaped those goals, from the desire to live in a single-family home in the suburbs with a white picket fence and shows like Leave It to Beaver, up to more recent times where television was portraying a wonderful lifestyle when people were living in apartments in city, like in Seinfeld and Friends. So all of these factors combine to have an impact on the market. Our point here is that we do expect vacancies to go up, but there's no point in being in shock simply because you see significant supply numbers in a particular neighborhood. You've really got to look at the whole picture. We moved quickly through these slides, so you didn't get a lot of time to look at the individual charts. You can obviously go back and pause through them, or you can look at the accompanying article on our website. We have all the charts there. We hope you found this video useful, and we'll hope you'll join us again next Friday for another apartment market update.